Hi all, and welcome to the Medical AI Lab group session. Today I'm delighted that we have Jonathan Williams talking to us today about language models or general purpose interfaces. Without further ado, take it away, Jonathan.
Thank you. I'll share screen now. So this presentation is on language models. It's a recent paper put out by, I think, Microsoft. So here's a presentation. So foundational models, I must give a just broad introduction. So the actual term foundational model is coined by a Stanford group relatively recently. And basically a foundational model is a model that's trained on a very large data set. So by training a model on a very large data set, whether it be an NLP model like BERT or a vision model like ResNet 50, by training your model on a very large data set, you allow it to gain a broad general understanding of the field it must make predictions for. So for example, with the BERT model, by training it on millions of examples of English sentences, you give it a broad understanding of how English works, how should English flow. Or for the vision example of the ResNet 50 model, by training it on millions and millions of examples of images, you give it a sense of what should I be looking for in this image in order to classify it. So that's like a broad introduction to foundational models, trained a very large data set, often in a very self-supervised manner. So if you want to train a model on a big data, you often cannot have every example labeled because that's very expensive. You must pay for labeling, it's time intensive, monetarily expensive. So usually we create, faux procedures by maybe modifying our image or having our model reproduce the text in order to train the model. So it's a very efficient use of unlabeled data that's thrown into our foundational model. And the utility is that it can be fine-tuned for a downstream task. So once you have a foundational model like BERT or ResNet 50, you can attach a classification head on top and fine-tune it for your downstream task. And MetaLM is significant because it unifies various foundational models. So as I mentioned, a foundational model allows your model to gain a broad understanding of the world. So if you could somehow unify different foundational models, you could enable a central model to have kind of different modalities of interacting with the world. So let's say, for example, in a hypothetical world, I had an overarching model that could incorporate a vision foundational model and a language foundational model and a audio foundational model. That model could kind of, in a sense, it could perceive both natural language, it could perceive vision, it could perceive audio, and make predictions using all those different modalities. So the significance, the high level significance of this MetaLM publication, that it's taking kind of an incremental step towards general artificial intelligence, because MetaLM, it fuses both a vision foundational model and a language foundational model. And it just pull those models from prior publications. And because it can draw upon prior foundational models, it can interpret multimodal inputs. So it can interpret both textual inputs and image inputs. So it kind of has multiple senses, if that makes sense. Introduction. So the MetaLM kind of name stands for meta language model. And the input data is natural language, so natural English text or image text pairs. And the output from the model is natural language, so natural English. It's useful because if you can frame any classification task in terms of natural language, this MetaLM model can be used to make predictions on that task. And the model has two major components. It has a general purpose interface, highlighted in orange here. It's a stack of decoder transformers. And this stack helps generate natural language. So it actually outputs the word predictions from the model. That's the first major component. The second major component is the backbone encoder networks. So I mentioned before that the MetaLM model, it fuses various foundational models. So you have a language foundational model here, a vision foundational model, a multilingual foundational model. So the backbone encoder network is used to incorporate the information that is gained by these various pre-trained foundational models. And in this paper, although they have this multilingual block, I found it confusing, but they didn't actually incorporate a multilingual foundational model. They only utilized a prior trained NLP foundational model and a vision foundational model to provide embeddings. So to give you a better understanding of the backbone encoder network, I'll provide like that in-depth explanation. So it has two major components. It has a collection of pre-trained non-causal encoders. It has a connector glue layer. And I guess the best way to understand this is to kind of go through how this backbone encoder network handles a provided input sequence. So let's say you give the input sequence into the model, like I like apples, for example. That input sequence is fed to our pre-trained encoders and to our tokenizer. So our tokenizer will break up the word and it will provide an embedding or a vectorized representation of each word in the sentence or in the sequence. Likewise, the pre-trained encoders, which are the foundational NLP models, they will also take in the input sequence and provide a vectorized representation of each word token in the sequence. Now, the word embeddings from all of these models, either the pre-trained encoder or their tokenizer lookup table, those are fed into a connector layer. So this is a feed-forward artificial neural network. It incorporates both the tokenization of the input sequence and the embeddings from the pre-trained foundational encoders, applies a nonlinearity, and outputs a vectorized input sequence embedding. So in short, the purpose of the backbone encoder network is to take in an input sequence, process it, and then provide a very rich vectorized embedding of the input sequence. So it takes in natural language and it outputs a row valued vector. And it can handle diverse inputs. So it handles both textual sequences and it handles image text pairs. And images are handled by if the pre-trained encoder is the vision encoder, that encoder actually processes the image to produce the embedding associated with that image. And that was the bottom major component of the model. We also have to talk about the top major component, which is the general purpose interface. So this component is a collection of transformer decoders. So a transformer is just a feed-forward model that's very optimized and is very efficient for handling sequential data. So transformers are used for a lot of NLP tasks. They're also used for a lot of time series analysis as well. And the decoder transformers, it takes in as input the vectorized embeddings from the prior encoder layer. So it takes in that vectorized embedding, it runs it through the decoder stack of transformers, and it outputs a prediction of what the next word token should be. And the output of this general purpose layer is natural language. So natural English is produced by this general purpose interface. That's about it for the slide. And so the MetaLM model is semi-causal. So the general purpose interface, which is the component of the model I was just talking about, it's causal. So when it predicts the next token, like let's say, for example, I wanted to predict this G token, it takes in the context of only the preceding tokens. So it processes the start token, the A, B, C, D, E, and utilizes all that prior information only to predict what the next G token should be. That's kind of a causal wish, looking at preceding data in order to make our current prediction. The backbone encoder network is non-causal. So the embedding that's produced for the IF token is affected by both preceding tokens and proceeding tokens. And by utilizing both these two modalities of understanding language, the causal and non-causal components, MetaLM gets the best of both worlds, in the sense that when we're training over our examples, we gain that causal memorized information. So the best way I like to explain is that, for example, let's say I had a sentence, the sun is blank. By training our general purpose interface, it will have that memorized knowledge to say the sun, it should say the sun is hot. Whereas let's say I wanted the model to summarize the sentiment of the sentence, I'm having a horrible day, for example. By having the non-causal encoder foundational models, it will be able to produce, okay, the sentiment is negative for that sentence. So MetaLM is powerful because it's leveraging the best of the causal framework and the non-causal framework. In the pre-trained task, so MetaLM is a very powerful model because it was pre-trained on a very large data set. And it was pre-trained in an autoregressive manner. So it was pre-trained to, given a input sequence, how can we best reproduce that exact input sequence? I guess a classic example would be like, let's say I fed the model the words or the sentence like, hello, my name is John, for example. I would train the model so that it perfectly reproduces the sentence, hello, my name is John. The reason being is that if you feed this model millions of examples, and it learns to replicate how to reproduce those sentences, it is in effect learning how to effectively produce natural English. And so once the MetaLM model was pre-trained, I should be calling this really quickly. This autoregressive approach was self-supervised. So we didn't have to label any of the data in order to train this model. And it's a very efficient means to utilize unlabeled data. So it was a self-supervised approach. It just learned innate patterns from unlabeled data. And after pre-training, the model was able to just readily generate natural language. So you queue it up and you say, what should my next token be? So kind of demonstrated by this graphic on the right I made. Let's say you queue it up and it would say I, and then I am, and then I am happy, and then I am happy, period. So the MetaLM model is similar to other very popular models like GPT-3 in that it auto-regressively produces natural language, and it can produce, I think, a context length of 2048. So it can produce in a block, in a single block, like a 2048 long text string. That will make like coherent sense. And MetaLM was pre-trained for two different tasks, both text classification tasks and text plus image classification tasks. And we had to use two different data sets in order to accomplish this goal. So when they trained a MetaLM for text classification tasks, they used the PyL database. This is 800 gigabytes of natural English text pulled from diverse resources. They pulled it from like academic resources. They pulled it from Wikipedia pages, from just straight internet, like social media platforms. But it was 800 gigabytes. It's just a huge data set and took many days to train, but that was used in order to train the text-only version of the MetaLM model. And when we actually threw in the text into the MetaLM model, it had to be processed because models can't actually work upon natural language. It must be vectorized in some manner. So they used a word tokenizer to convert words to numbers. They also used the non-causal NLP encoder in order to convert words into numbers, into embeddings. That was the text-only version of the model. They also had the text and image version of the model. So this utilized the conceptual captions, the visual genome, and the COCO captions data sets. And all in all, it had to iterate over 10 million image text pairs. And similarly, we use the word tokenizer. So we had to somehow convert words into numbers for the model to process. So we used the word tokenizer for that step of the process. And then we also use the non-causal vision encoder in order to convert the images into numbers for our model to effectively process. So the MetaLM model for the language only, it was readily able to fine tune on a variety of downstream tasks. So it was fine tuned on around 34 NLP data sets. And these data sets had NLP tasks ranging from sentiment analysis to text summarization to reading comprehension, question answer, etc. A full list is described in this diagram on the left here. And when we were fine tuning the model, you don't actually update all the weights. We froze the weights of the general purpose interface model and only the weights of the foundational encoder models and the intermediary connector layer were updated during the fine tuning training. And the overall conclusion from the paper is that the MetaLM model outperformed the baseline GPT model. I found it, so while I was reading the paper, I found it somewhat confusing that they didn't use GPT-2 or 3 because those are more recent models. They chose to use the GPT base that was released many years ago, but it did outperform the GPT baseline on these NLP tasks, which is promising. And it has very robust capabilities. The MetaLM model has very, it can perform many different tasks. So it can summarize text, it can perform sentiment analysis, it can perform zero-shot priming. So you say, like, who is the lead singer of this band? It will provide an answer for this. You can actually dialogue with it, kind of like the famous thing you see with GPT-3. You can just have a conversation with MetaLM. So by just fine tuning on your downstream task, it can have many different use cases, if that makes sense. And MetaLM was also used for vision language tasks. So it was fine-tuned on image captioning data sets and then visual question and answering data sets. So image captioning, basically, you throw an image at the model and it provides a caption. And then the visual question answering is you say, you throw an image at the model and a question, and it has to take in information from both the question itself and the image and provide an answer. And when we were fine-tuning the model on these two separate tasks, only the weights of the vision non-causal encoder and the intermediate connector layer were updated. Basically, the general purpose interface, those weights were frozen. And it provided, actually, it outperformed contemporary vision language models. And these models are actually recent. So this result, in my opinion, is even more impressive because these papers are published even within this year. So MetaLM model is a very promising framework. Similarly, for the vision language task, it had very robust capabilities. So you could provide an image, you could say, okay, summarize the image, or you could provide an image and say, what color is a panda, and then provide an answer. And all the answers are provided in natural language because once again, the model only can output natural language. So you could have multi-turn dialogue with the model. So you could have multi-turn dialogue in which your dialogue incorporates both textual and image information, which was very, very impressive. So I guess the big takeaway from this paper is that the semi-causal language modeling, it's a very promising paradigm because you're able to have your cake and eat it too, in the sense that you fuse the benefits of rote knowledge. So memorization, kind of, you gain that from your general purpose interface, which is kind of memorizing general knowledge about the world around it. And you also gain intuitive knowledge. So by having the non-causal foundational backbone encoders, you gain an intuitive understanding of how can I reason about a problem that I may not have complete information about, and how can I provide an accurate guess, if that makes sense. And MetaLM is readily fine-tunable for downstream classification tasks, which provides this paper kind of, I guess, in my sense, provides like a kind of step towards general artificial intelligence. So we're having models that are now able to perceive both images effectively and text effectively. So the future directions, the inclusion, I guess the most immediate future direction would be the inclusion of multilingual data sets. So they didn't train the model any like a translation tasks, which would be a nice future direction in order to see how the model can perform at, translating English to French or French to German, things of that nature. And a very natural future direction is the inclusion of more foundational models. So the current iteration of MetaLM, it only incorporates a vision foundational model and a NLP foundational model. So in the future, they would like to incorporate like an audio foundational model, so you can have kind of more senses. You can have both the vision, the talk, the audio, etc. So by having those more foundational models, you give your model more senses that can perceive, that can use to perceive and provide predictions. And they also like to extend the general purpose interface layer so that it can produce not only natural text, but it can also perform vision tasks. So let's say it could perform object detection or object classification. That would be a very exciting future direction for the project. So that's about it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, John.